My name is Javier Munoz, and this is the What Brings You Here podcast, where we spotlight remarkable people who are making a change in the world, one brilliant epic project at a time. Today, we have Pierre Heistein. He is the author of Talking to Iran, a book about conversations with people and places of Iran. Now, the premise is that if all that you know about a country and its people comes from the news, you surely have an incomplete picture. Our guest today traveled 11,000 kilometers through an epic journey in this country, sleeping in couches, sleeping on the floor, sleeping on the occasional spare bed in order to collect the stories that make this remarkable book. The following is not an interview about just adventure travel. It is also about the pursuit of your truth and the feeling of being alive by the direct experience of the world. Pierre, welcome to the What Brings You Here podcast. It's so great to have you in this one. We are eager to know a lot about your epic project, and thank you for making the time to come and join us.
Thank you for the invitation. This is great.
Absolutely. I mean, I jumped at the opportunity because I saw your post in LinkedIn about your epic project in Iran, and I definitely am very interested and in tune and aligned with the ideas that I think you're going to bring regarding how traveling allows you to connect to the universal aspects of humans, no matter what the nationality is or the prejudices that we may have. We always find this underlying element that is common to all of us, no matter what, and that's only possible when you travel. And so I am assuming that part of your discovery was on the same line.
Yeah, similar. And yeah, you certainly can't go wrong with travel. Definitely the different types of travel surface different things, but any form of travel, whether it's physical or not, is an amazing exposure to just difference, difference, and like you say, similarity.
Yes. And so, as you can see, the title of this podcast is What Brings You Here? And I think it's a powerful question because it really points to the things that fire you up and that are sequenced to take you to where you are at any given moment. And so I wanted to ask you what brought you to the realization that you wanted to do this trip. And if you can connect to maybe the early foundation of that motivation, maybe in your
Mm.
childhood or something that you experienced in your youth, that maybe created the conditions for you to approach this trip, because it's not trivial, I guess, right? To just jump and say, I'm going to go across a country by foot, or I don't know exactly how you did it, but this epic realization of something that's so different had to come from somewhere. And so I wanted for you to first quickly introduce what the project is, and then tell me what is that brought you to that moment when you made the decision.
That's an interesting question. Yeah, so I mean, in brief, the project arose rather. It wasn't. It didn't start as a project. The project arose from a curiosity of mine to go and discover Iran. I was at a conference. I can't remember where now, honestly. Whether it was a one young world conference, which brings together young leaders from all over the world. I think 192 countries. So everybody's there. Everyone's represented rather, and I sat down to have lunch at the shared tables and got chatting to two people from Iran, and I was just blown away, not necessarily by them, and whether they were special or not. Rather, I was blown away at how my perception of Iran did not fit my conversation with them in any way. And I don't think we even spoke about Iran. I think we just spoke about normal things you speak about when you sit down to lunch. But it was only by seeing the contrast that I was able to become aware of how opinionated I was about Iran. And Iran's quite special in that way because when you think about the world, I mean, there are many countries we know nothing about, depending on who you are, obviously. So I don't want to generalize, but you could bring up Papua New Guinea or Suriname or Ivory Coast. You know, the world is full of places we know absolutely nothing about. But Iran is so present in the news that it becomes present in our conscience. And so whether we know it or not, we begin to form opinions and prejudices. And I did not know that I had done that until I met these two people from Iran who completely contradicted the story I was telling to myself. And that's what triggered my curiosity of being like, well, I clearly can't trust the sources of information that I'm receiving. So I can either read a lot more about it or I can just go there. And that's what I decided to do, which I can share more about. It wasn't as easy as that. It's a difficult country to travel to, but I managed eventually, and we can go into detail if that interests you. But your Genesis question is really interesting of what took me even to that moment of having that curiosity and desire and the willingness or desire to put my body behind that curiosity, not just Google search and learn through text. And I think that probably, I mean, it may sound funny, but I think that probably stems from a belief or lack of belief. I do not believe in an afterlife. At least I do not believe that our conscious selves transcend into another space after we die here on Earth. Now, whether there is a broader collective spirituality behind that, there may well be. But I do not. I believe that once we die here on Earth, that is us as our singular conscious being. That is our end. And what that does for me is it makes me highly motivated to squeeze out to squeeze out as much out of this life as I can. But I need to also frame that properly because it's not about more or achievement or doing as much as I can possibly do in the time that I'm given. Rather, I, there is so much richness in the world. There is so much beauty in the world, whether that's in people or things or through my window now, I'm just staring at some very ordinary yellow flowers. But you go into the detail of those, they are phenomenally complex and beautiful, and any square centimeter on Earth holds that. And so, I guess what drives me throughout everything I do is just trying to remain conscious of whether I am connected to that immensity of richness and beauty that we're given in this one shot we have at life. And obviously, bills need to be paid, and stability is good, and structure is helpful. And so I don't live an entirely wild life. There's also beauty in stillness and stability and structure. But what it does do to me is it helps me just almost constantly ask myself, am I connecting to the world around me? I frame that as connecting to the natural beauty and to travel, but I mean that can also be connecting to a job, to a career. It's just holding that question present, and at that moment of time, it led me to follow my curiosity to Iran for 3 months.
That's fantastic. And the underlying search that I detect in what you're telling me is also the search for what is the truth of it. Because you had your own prejudice, let's say, your own ideas about the country, formed by a series of all kinds of information that has been given. Okay. And then you had this very revealing conversation where there was a striking contrast. My take is that it goes beyond just that conversation. It goes beyond the subject of Iran. It is really about what is true, right? And so you have a normal conversation with ordinary people from a country. It reveals that there is great contrast. So in for you to really connect to that experience of what the world can give you, you also have to connect to through the layers of everything that we think we believe about something, and then really establish a relationship that is direct and that is true. And so, because otherwise, I mean, you could be really taken aback by the contrast and everything, but from there to actually making a decision to go on and figure that out for yourself, it had to really, really connect to a question that had to be even more fundamental than just Iran or the contrast of it. It had to be about, what in what to what degree the stuff that we're given spoon fed every day is really representative of the truth, and in what way am I missing out, in my life if I'm only fed that information. Yeah. And so going
Right.
going out there and really connecting to the truth of it is what makes you feel alive. And that is my speculation of maybe some of the motivation that could have driven you to do something that epic.
That's right. And it's the topic of the truth is an interesting one because also when you read, so I've written a book on my trip through Iran, and that is the project that you refer to. The trip itself wasn't a project; it was really just a let's go and see. But I did so much writing throughout the trip, and that I'm now editing that into a book, posting it online as I get through yeah, I've written it all and now I post as I edit it. But it's very interesting also in the editing process to hold that question close of what is the truth. And I think the motivation was less about what is the truth, because I don't think that when we talk about, well, anything, but especially a country and their people, that the truth exists. I think what unsettled me in that first seed of the idea wasn't so much that I didn't know the truth, but that I was holding and living a truth that was not my own. I was living somebody else's truth that had been given to me. I knew that I would not leave the trip from Iran knowing the truth. I knew that I would only see a fraction of what there is to see and understand a fraction of what there is to understand. Not just because of time and place, but also because I couldn't speak Persian. I can't speak Persian. And so anyone I interacted with in Iran would need to speak English. Now that actually wasn't true, which there's some interesting stories about things lost in translation. But obviously, any interaction with Iran also came with its own bias of I was interacting with people who could mostly speak English or who were from a certain age group, were mostly men. Depending on the area of Iran, it's very difficult to interact with women. So I would always come away with a biased perspective of Iran, but at least it would be my bias and not a bias imposed on me, whether consciously or not.
Exactly. And it seems that when you had the conversation, the initial conversation, you realized that your own bias was far from what probably is closer to the truth. So you wanted to go and verify, at least to the best of your ability, what that could be the case on the ground. And still, I find it really epic. Let me ask you. Um, so the idea of writing the book was born after the trip.
Yes, after enduring. So one of the things I promised myself when I went to Iran was I wanted to experiment. I mean, apart from I also just wanted to have a really good adventure, right? But I wanted to experiment what it was to do something with no objectives whatsoever.
Mm.
And because my whole life has been driven by objectives, this project, that project, this outcome, there was always an identified goal, which is obviously very important to drive you forward. But I wanted to experiment. What if I had no goal? And this was really hard because when I arrived in Iran, so I also had a bit of fun, and I deliberately did not book a hotel for the first night or any other night when I arrived. And so I got off the plane not knowing where I was going to sleep that night. And that was a really physical way of trying to embody this goal of just traveling without an objective. And so I didn't have a planned route through Iran. I knew that I would have at least 45 days to start. I didn't know how many times my visa would be renewed. But I said to myself, if I spend my entire trip without leaving Tehran, which is where I flew into, that's okay. Now, obviously, inside I was going, no, no, that's not okay. You must travel thousands of kilometers. You must see many cities. You must crisscross the country and meet many people. But immediately conditioning the trip then was not being open to the spontaneity. And I really tried to go as much as I could in saying, Iran, lead me. Iran, allow the moments to lead me, and having no goal whatsoever. And so part of that was obviously I had the idea of, well, what could I get out of this? An Instagram following or a photo shoot or a book or writing. And I had to really let go of all of that, to truly lean into the trip. Now, obviously, I took diaries. I love writing. I wrote a lot. In Iran, I learned to write dialogue. I learned to remember and write dialogue. But initially, it was all from just the point of view of allowing the notebook to help me reflect, to help me record for my own purposes. I obviously had a lot of free time on my hands. And only afterwards did I look at what I'd written over the 3 months and thought, this is all very badly written, but there's a lot of it. And if I edit it properly, this could become one hell of a story. And that's what it ended up being. But that was not the plan initially.
So, what was uh, an experience that really took you by surprise that maybe shifted your worldview of this country or of yourself?
I'll start with the latter question. I of myself was really pushing the limits of how much I could go with the flow. And so what would often happen, um, a lot of the transport I used in Iran was what they have sort of shared taxis. Now they're just sedan cars. You could see four people and the driver, and they travel all around Iran, sometimes doing quite long distances. And basically, they just pick up anybody who flags them down, and you pay for however long you're in the car, and they just go, and people get on, get off, and you travel up, and you're all squeezed together in the back, often with lots of bags, shoulder to shoulder, sweating on each other through the South Tehran heat. And quite often in those vehicles, even though there was very little communication in English, I would get invited to go with the person when they were getting out of the car, and presumably to stay with them. But that wasn't always clear. So it was clear enough to me that it was an invitation, but I didn't know to what, to where, or for how long, and I didn't really understand who I was being invited by. And I said yes at every chance that was possible, well, almost every chance that was possible. There were certain moments where you obviously intuitively read that it's not a good idea, or would just be extremely yeah, impractical or boring. But most of the invitations I got, I said yes to, and so I explored a lot about myself in that sense of just spending immense amounts of time doing nothing. Um, we, the hospitality in Iran is the most extreme I've ever seen, and so I'd get invited into people's houses, and then we'd often sit on the carpet, depending on where you are in Iran. But typically, there's very little furniture in the homes. It's just a carpet, and then the room has different uses at different times of the day, and so they'll put out a tablecloth or they'll put out blankets, depending. But I spent a lot of time just sitting on a carpet, drinking tea and eating dried fruit with my host, who had absolutely no way of communicating to me. And we would just sit in each other's company, sometimes for hours on end. And it was extremely uncomfortable for both of us, but at the same time, so unique. And there was some incredible moments where, after sometimes literally hours of just drinking tea, way more tea than the bladder should ever be able to cope with, uh, there would be this somehow spark of conversation. And I remember one fellow right up in the north of Iran, in a very rural village, where I had actually decided to get off the bus and just walk. I saw a road that wound up the hill, and in the late afternoon, I thought, well, I'm just going to walk up that road and see what happens. I got quite worried that day, actually, because it was starting to get dark, and I was in the middle of the forest, and I had no idea where I was going. But luckily, serendipitously, a motorbike came by and picked me up, and, and then he didn't really know what to do with me. He knew he shouldn't leave me in the forest, but he didn't really know what to do with me, so he took me home. But I had no idea then if he was inviting me to stay or not, so it was also quite uncomfortable. I didn't want to impose, but I also really had no other options. And so in that case, we spent hours sitting on his carpet doing nothing. Uh, and then we started kind of, he signaled, I think, to his children and to his bit of sign language. And then I had a very, very basic phrase book. And through that very basic phrase book, when he realized I had it, he sort of grabbed it from me and started flipping through. And we ended up having a conversation on the politics of South Africa, if you can
Wow.
believe it. And yeah, I certainly couldn't believe it. And this is what he was so interested in, was how power was structured in South Africa. This rural farmer in the hills of Iran. And we managed that conversation through a phrase book. Now, obviously, it wasn't, we couldn't write a New York Times analysis piece with what was exchanged, but we had that conversation. And I found that quite phenomenal. Just how eventually you get there. You get there.
So I would, maybe through my own bias, imagine that they didn't get to have many conversations with foreigners very frequently, and so that was like an opportunity for them to also have the same, the same situation that you were experiencing, is to see the reality through the eyes of someone that is not from there.
That's right. That's right. And again, it very much depends on where you are in Iran. So as to not repeat that almost in every question, I'll ask the audience just to keep that in mind, that Iran is many places, but in general, yes, there, apart from the middle kind of spine of tourism, which is Tehran, Isfahan, and Shiraz, there's very little Western tourism. There's quite a lot of Arab tourism. There's quite a lot of mostly tourism from the Middle East, from the wealthier Arab countries. There's a bit of Asian tourism, East Asian tourism around the fringes, but in terms of Western tourism, it really sticks to that middle spine. So outside of that, yes, there was an absolute fascination with a foreigner from many different sides. One was just, what on earth are you doing here? Nobody comes here. The other was, well, who are you? And I want to learn about you. And then the other aspect was, Iranians are very aware of how the world has been told to perceive them. And in many people I met, again, there's probably a bias here. Obviously, the people who spoke to me were of this nature.
Mhm.
They were very keen to reverse that. They were very keen to communicate to you that they are not as was painted. And that in itself had many facets and many angles, which I explore more in the book. It certainly wasn't one thing. Different Iranians painted different pictures of themselves. But yes, there was it was an overwhelming desire to converse and invite and be hospitable.
Mhm. Have you been in other Middle Eastern countries before?
No, this was the first.
Yes. And so, I mean, in some ways, there are many parallels with any other Middle Eastern country. Like hospitality is a value that is shared across the board. If you go to Egypt, you will probably experience basically the same thing. It's I call it reciprocity anxiety. This is the term.
Yes.
This is the term I use because you have this the hospitality is so overwhelming that you have the natural human need of being also reciprocal, and so you can't exactly imagine how to do that because naturally you're not in a position to offer the same way as they can, at home. And then you just start imagining ways of being also generous. But I think it's a type of anxiety that's the best type when it comes from a need to give back, and because you feel welcome in that way. But for example, if you go to Syria, it's very, very similar as well. I learned from a friend of mine that houses in Syria used to have a room that had its own door. So imagine the house had the main door with all the different amenities that a house would have, but then there was this other room that had its own door from outside, and that would be the room you would give to people that were just passing by and needed a place. These houses in Syria had this element of hospitality structurally embedded in the architecture.
Wow.
So it was part of the architecture of it. I was wondering whether you saw that. It was one of my questions to you, if you saw this type of features in the houses that would allow for this type of situation. Granted, in Syria, this was something that used to be the case back in the day, long time ago. Like current houses don't accommodate for those elements. But if you go like out there in the outskirts of the main cities, in the little towns, still you have old houses that are like that and are used in that way.
It's a good question. I don't remember something of that nature specifically. Architecturally, and again, there was a lot of diversity, but mostly there was one big common room in the houses in Iran, and then there would be sometimes be extra bedrooms or in the back, and there'd certainly be a kitchen and bathrooms. But that one room, depending on the wealth level of the family, was used for everything. In the poorer families, it would even be used to store the motorbikes at night. And then the men would typically sleep there. So it's also an interesting question. I don't know where the woman would have so what I was going to say was that the men slept there and the woman slept in a separate bedroom. But now I actually don't know if that was the norm or whether that was because of my presence there. Because more in the south, there was very, very strong separation. I mean, in some households, I had stayed for 2 or 3 days and I never saw the woman of the house.
Wow.
Um, that was perhaps on one extreme. In other cases, I had wonderful interactions with the women of the house, without headscarves, dressed as anyone in our culture would be within their homes.
Mhm.
And then I lived everything between. But I remember one house that really struck me in the south, very south of Iran, in the Baluchistan province, where I stayed with a young man for, I think it was 3 or 4 days, and his mother cooked food for us every meal during that time, and I never saw her.
Wow.
And it was just that very, very hard line separation. Um, there was certainly culturally factors around hospitality which are very interesting. So there's this wonderful concept which I also explore in the book called taruf, which also more rooted in traditional, or those who live a more traditional culture. But this idea that you only once you express an invitation or an offer 3 times is it sincere. So your role as the counterparty then is to refuse the offer at least twice,
Mhm.
because there were many examples, when someone would just say, I'd say to them, nice shirt, and they'd say, oh, please have it. It's for
Right.
you. And I'd say, no, no, no. And they go, no, please, I insist. And I'd go, no. And they go, okay. Now, had they insisted a third time, then it's a genuine offer. And that was very ingrained in the culture. And I had to be quite aware of that, because obviously when you arrive, if you're not aware of that, you feel like everyone's just trying to invite you everywhere and give you everything. But
Mhm.
there's some examples that are so silly, where they're clearly offering, I mean, literally offering the shirt off their back,
Yes.
which obviously is not not a genuine offer in the moment. But it can be quite confusing. So I was glad that quite early in my trip that was pointed out to me, and I was able to manage that through the rest of the trip.
Mm, very, very cool. So I understand from, I think, a map that you shared in LinkedIn that you went north to south. You went across the whole country, right?
Yeah. So despite me saying I'd be happy to stay in Iran for as long as it took, by following my curiosity and prompts and invitations, I did end up naturally cutting down straight from Tehran through Isfahan, Shiraz, down to um, the coast in the south. I knew, I arrived in April, and I knew that by June, July, it would almost be too hot to travel the south. So I did go there first, and then and through that spine, I saw quite a few foreigners, depending on which countries they were from. Different countries have different levels of freedom with which they're allowed to travel through Iran. And then from the south, I went east to the Pakistani border, and then went straight up the border. First the border with Pakistan, then the border with Afghanistan, um, and I'm getting that order right. Yes. And then up to the north, cuts across the north. So there's a beautiful mountain range between um, that cuts off Tehran from the north of Iran and the northern coast. And so I looped around that. And that was also very surprising for me, because I think probably one of the most common visual expectations of Iran is that it's all dry and sparse and desert like. And actually, in the north, that's not true at all. It's thick, lush forest, and it's beautiful. Comparable to the south of Chile, or even some parts like the Swiss Alps. Just, but even more lush. Really moist forest. Lots of rivers, lots of waterfalls. Beautiful towns, really well kept. And so I crossed that, and then went down, um, the western border with Iraq, through Kurdistan. And Kurdistan was a whole discovery of its own, because it was divided up. But in fact, back in the day, it was essentially its own culture. And if things were split around cultural lines, it should have been its own country. And I say that along cultural lines. There's obviously politics behind that, which is obviously, different. But that was fascinating also to see these cultures within Iran and whether they identified first as Iranian or other cultures, and unpacking that was also very interesting. And so then went down those mountains, which also just blew my mind. I mean, incredible valleys, really steep mountains, and just these different villages almost hanging over the cliffs of mountains. A really spectacular scenery, stuff I'd never expected to see, let alone in Iran.
So, would you go back again?
I, I'd love to. I'd go back in a heartbeat. It's not easy. It depends on what passport you hold. Is how some countries are completely banned from going outright. Some countries you can go, but you have to go with a guided tour. It was probably one of the only times in my life where having a South African passport worked in my favor. So I was given almost free move. Well, I was given full free movement through Iran. I managed to get a 45-day visa initially and then renew it twice. Um, so I would need to see how possible that was again. Um, but I'd love to go back. I mean, I think in many ways, and I closed the book on similar sentiments. I think in many ways I fell in love with Iran. Just the complexity of it was so visceral. But again, it wasn't necessarily because it was Iran. It was because it was, when you meet somebody and they live like they're holding on to a live wire, and they live at a level of intensity and passion and expression and complexity and conflict and just an aliveness that is unique to them, but also representative of what it means to be human, just that the
Yeah,
rest of us express it maybe slower and in a more moderate way. Well, I found Iran to be that. I found it an incredible, almost concentrated dose of what it means to be human, and reflective of any country in the world. It had parallels with anywhere else I've ever been, in its essence, and yet I think traveling Iran was just connecting to that on a much more intense level, a much more accelerated level. Um, Partly because of the nature of my trip. I've never done a similar type of trip in any other country, so it'd be interesting to experiment that. But also just because of the Iranians themselves. And again, I don't want to generalize, but they're an incredible people. They live viscerally and
yeah.
and and beautifully.
Well, my take would be that if you were to do a similar trip with no plan like this, with no objectives, with no set agenda, which is a wonderful experiment, if you were to do it somewhere else, you would also connect to that universal humanness, but through the lens of their culture, right?
Mm,
But there is a universal humanness underneath the layer of culture that is unifying and universal. And it took me quite a bit of traveling for me to realize. So my bet would be that you would find that as well. And but it's an open question because you never know exactly, what the experience is going to be, and to have some sort of preconceived notion of that, I think goes against the experience also a lot. So I love the way you just threw yourself in this experience just to soak in whatever it is that happened, as a good adventure should be, and you were open to collect all these wonderful stories, which now have turned into this book. And so I heard at the start of your of this conversation that it means as if this is the project, right? Where this book takes shape and you start uh, talking about it. And so I wanted to know, Pierre, what is that going to be like? What is your aspirational story? To use just action terminology, what is your aspirational story for this project that now is going to take the shape of a book that will then have its own wings and take you to places? So I was wondering what that vision is, what is that you want, so that maybe people listening to you in this podcast help you to achieve it, because this is what Just Action is about. It's about helping people with their epic projects. So what's that like as you start this phase?
Well, thank you. That's kind of you to ask. The goal, the first physical production goal is to finish editing my writing. I'm nearly there, and create a complete book about my travels. And it's also, I had to ask a professional in the industry to categorize my book because it's not travel log, it's not a travel diary, but it's also not a memoir. I have in many ways excluded myself from there's almost nowhere in the book where I share my own opinion or I share about my personal journey or my perceptions. It's a book that tries to take others into the spaces I was and into the conversations I had, take them into a space of seeing and listening to Iran. And my goal behind that is twofold. I mean, one, obviously, I made very conscious decisions about going to Iran. It did depend on me. I saw the opportunity. I took the opportunity, but that's small compared to, I was given the opportunity as well, just by the nature of my life and the structure of my life. Not everyone has that opportunity. There are probably many people, no, not probably, definitely many people in the world who would love to make the decisions I made, but can't for whatever personal reasons they have. So I would love to offer this to them as well. Well,
Mm.
not everyone could just go for 3 months, here, go through the book. But there is a bigger question around it as well of if I would love to impart what happened to me after the trip, which I don't write about at all, but it will happen through reading the book, is that, once your preconception of a place or a people can change so much as it did for me, then obviously you start questioning all of your other preconceptions about other places and other people, or even ideas or ideologies, or whatever stories you are carrying and opinions you're carrying that are not necessarily your own. You start questioning. You talked about the truth. We all carry truths with us, and Iran, my trip through Iran, so violently broke my adopted truth that now I question even harder other truths that I have, and I question whether they're my own or whether they're adopted. And I would love to impart that on the reader, because I think that is a process and a skill and uh, a curiosity that we're missing in the world today, and that we desperately need. We are we seem to have we seem to be losing our curiosity about each other. We turn first to throwing opinions at each other, and yet very few times are we sufficiently informed to be able to throw opinions. And so that is the greater mission behind this book for those who choose to accept that invitation. And to your very tangible question, publishing a book is hard. Writing a book is hard, but publishing a book is even harder. And unfortunately, it's not a fully fair competitive world. It does require knowing people, and I don't know people in this space. So if anybody does, or if anybody has experience in this, or if anybody has been facing the challenges that I'm facing and have found their way through them, I would love you to get in touch with me and help me bring what I think is a beautiful project into the world, because I can do so much and then I can do no more. And I do need help uh, in that
Hmm.
space.
I'm gonna make the connection to this other epic project that we didn't talk about in this interview, but has to do with what you did in San Rafael last year, which was also epic in many ways. And I remember listening to that interview that you gave over there, that you said that sometimes projects are bigger than yourself, and that people come to the rescue and give you whatever it is that is needed to make the grand vision come alive. I love that. I love that because I think that is really the definition of higher purpose, where when you connect to a higher purpose, it is bigger than you. And if it is bigger than you, then by definition, it involves other people. And I think this project of yours and what you are bringing to as an experience goes beyond just a tale about Iran. It's really a tale about how we have to remain curious, open, and have conversations. Not to be enslaved by our own prejudices to the point where we cannot have a conversation with someone that seemingly might have a different point of view. That is killing us. This isolation is killing the very institutions that allowed us to evolve. And I don't think it's a good recipe for evolution, for human evolution moving forward. We're gonna have to do away with that and connect to what you just said, which is open up, surrender to the possibility that your belief system may be limiting. Ask, be curious, be open. Yes, it takes energy to do that. It takes basically the intent of really validating and verifying and making sure. It's like a pursuit for, is this what I'm feeling? Is it real? And for that, you have to really value what truth is, or what the reality of things are. You have to value it a lot so that you go and then you ask the question. Because otherwise, then you're very merry with your own views of things, and you're just happy with it. It's low energy, right? It doesn't require much energy to just keep your own beliefs, once they are
Right.
established, right? So the risk is tremendous when it's not a small thing. When you have already a worldview that is structured, number one. Second, when you have already established relationships with people that shared your worldview. Second, right? Second problem. And third, it requires you to really move away from your comfort zone. Third, those three things keep you enslaved to these realities that are fed to us. And it's comfortable because it's low energy. It doesn't require much. So really, any departure from that will require you to maybe have to break some of those belief systems, maybe have to break some of the relationships with people that share those belief systems, and get out of the comfort zone and be out there, without really knowing what to expect. And those things, they are not small things, but we all have to do them. And so I congratulate you for taking the step and doing that epic journey, because I think it's going to be a massive, it's super important what you did. And the message has to do not only with Iran, but in general with the way in which we have to navigate the world in general. Yes, anything. So this is about this. It turns out to be about this journey, but it's really a lot bigger. So I agree with you that this is not really a travel log. It's more like a philosophy a lifestyle type of, or no, a life philosophy type of book. So yeah, I'm just thinking aloud how this could connect. But I think this should be published and it should have wide distribution. Are you intending to publish this in the US?
I'd love to. Yeah, I mean, I've written in English, so the obvious markets would be the US and the United Kingdom to start with, at least. Although, thankfully, technology is allowing amazing translation it complements and acts as an addition to established views as well. Because, again, I repeat, this is not a book that shares the truth about Iran or
Mhm.
a even what's more true about Iran. A lot of what we hear in the news is true. Um, but an interesting question to pose to yourself as well is, if, wherever you're listening from, if people were to learn about your country only through the news, no movies, no meeting somebody from there, no business meetings, no cultural exchanges, no products. You think about all the things we don't see from Iran, no music, no theater, all of those things we consume from the US, for example. So if your country was represented only by what people see in the news about your country, what would your country look like?
Mhm.
And I can almost guarantee it wouldn't be very positive. And yet, if that's all you're receiving, then that's how our opinions form about the people in that country as
Mhm.
well. Um, and yet, the people don't create the news. The people create the music. The people create the hospitality. The people create the food. The people create the business meetings. The people create the products and the services. And yet, we're cut off from interacting with the Iranian people by not being able to interact with any of those things. All we can interact with is the news. And so my book is not the truth. It's not, it's simply an attempt at adding diversity to how we learn about somewhere else, and in that, a wake up call to evaluate how we're learning about other people and other places as well.
That's fantastic, Pierre. So thank you so much for being part of this interview and this podcast, the What Brings You Here podcast. It's been great to have you. And hopefully, we'll be able to connect again and after your book is published. And hopefully, we'll be able to support you in the process of launching it. Until then, just action and make it epic.
Thank you. What a wonderful opportunity, and thank you for prompting my thoughts as well. A real privilege to be here. A wonderful project that you've started.
Thank you, sir.